Well, I still can't think of any good way to start this Restless episode, so we're just going to dive right in. I'm Father Joseph, and welcome to Restless. You've joined myself, Carmelena, and Joe, and also you've joined Paul. Not the Paul, but another Paul, a guy named Paul Brenner, who happens to be a religion teacher at a local Catholic high school and also a youth minister at a local Catholic parish. And we're grateful that you've joined us because today's topic is kind of the state of religious education in the church and how do we hand on the faith to the next generation? You know, a lot of people wring their hands, and I've met so many, parents who are, why is my kid, not having the faith handed on? And, part of that's because CCD is not the greatest invention since sliced bread. Maybe since sliced cheese, I'm not sure, but definitely not sliced bread. I'm sorry. So, yeah, I just want to hear, what was your experience growing up in terms of your religious formation, whether it was good, bad, indifferent? Did you go to public school? And Paul, you had mentioned over break that you had gone to a number of different schools. Tell us about some of the school experiences you've had.
Growing up, I went to a lot of different schools and a lot of different types of schools, mostly diocesan Catholic schools, but several of those. I was also homeschooled for a year. I went to...
So were you part of the School of the Year Club? Went to a different school?
Yeah, I mean, just even between 4th and 8th grade, I went to a different school every year.
Oh my gosh.
And so I got a lot of different... I got to take a little bit from all these different styles of teaching. Some were alternative schools, some were private schools.
Isn't that for kids that get kicked out of regular school?
Sometimes... Let's just leave it at that.
Oh, I'd love to hear more about your backstory.
And but I also got to see so many different teachers and so many different kids and so many different cultures.
Was that kind of rough? Like trying to make friends at different school every single year?
It's definitely more difficult than just, having the same people. But it's, I think figuring out a social landscape and choosing who you want to be friends with and becoming their friends isn't rocket science. And, we naturally know how to do it as humans. So
tell that to most millennials.
Yeah, well, that was before smartphones too. So that made it a little bit
that's true.
A different landscape.
So you were homeschooled too?
I was.
Just for a year?
Just for 1 year. And I was already, I think, 12 at the time. So it's kind of too late to start at that point when you have two boys and they're both unruly. And so it didn't work as well as a structured school just because we were sort of too old to try to
You missed that formation
ordered
piece.
then.
Yeah. That's interesting because I was not a lot of people know I was homeschooled for 6 years, starting when I was 12. And 6th through 12th grade, or 7th through 12th grade.
So I'm assuming it was your mother.
Yeah.
And was she really strict?
No, not at all. Not at all.
But you were just...
I'm just a type A personality.
A good kid. Okay.
I wouldn't say I'm a good kid, but...
Okay. But you wanted to learn and succeed.
I just wanted to get out of school.
And okay.
I went to a pretty awful Catholic school for 3 years.
Okay. Which will remain unnamed, I guess.
It's not around here.
Oh,
I grew up down in Maryland, so none of our listeners would know where that school is.
Yeah, it's really strange how, it's remarkable how some schools are doing so poorly with the religious education piece, and some schools are doing so well.
Yeah,
and it's a big question mark on what's the answer, because every demographic is different. The needs of every parish and every school are different, and
well, you had mentioned that nuns had a big impact in your...
Yes, yeah. Nuns are, I think...
So was that in high school or...
No, this was in 5th grade. And I think nuns are one of the best real-life exemplifications of self-gift.
Yeah,
and it's hard to look at a priest or a nun and say your entire life is meaningless, because if you deny Christ, then a priest or a nun is...
Their life is meaningless.
You don't even get it.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And in the Catholic school I went to for 3 years, I never once saw a priest or a nun. It was right across the street from the church, and never once did a priest ever come over. I think that would have made a difference in my life, to have seen or gotten to know a priest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even around here, the schools where the priest is really involved in the school, that makes a big difference.
It does, yeah. So Carmelena and Joe, you guys did not go to Catholic school, did you?
No, my formation was pretty abysmal. I had CCD when I was younger, and then I went to a public school that was pretty progressive, and then I went to public school for university and then for grad school as well, which was also pretty progressive.
So, like, what do you remember from your CCD classes?
My most vivid memory is I just remember feeling like I didn't want to be there. I was interested in lunch, which meant that it was over. So
You had it in the morning? Brutal.
yeah, it was in the morning, 8 a.m.s, I think, on Saturdays, something like that.
Oh, it's a lot of stuff I'd rather be doing at 8 a.m. on Saturday morning.
I felt the same way, and I wasn't really a morning person either. So I don't really think I made many friends. I remember gluing cotton balls onto pieces of paper. Why, I don't know, but I wasn't really
Gotta make
into
the
it.
Lamb of God. We've all done it. We've all made the Lamb of God with cotton balls.
That's probably what it was. Yeah, that's probably what it was. So it wasn't great. I received a lot of formation when I had actually reverted back into the Catholic Church when I was in grad school, and I had met focus missionaries that were very well formed. And
So did you go through RCIA at that point?
no,
So it was
because I had received all of my sacraments. It was just a matter of learning the faith, really, because I knew nothing. I didn't even know Jesus was in the Eucharist. That's how poorly formed I was. And yeah, it was. And then once I started discerning religious life through the convent, I received additional formation, and then it just became this thirst to learn about the faith and the church, and it was great. So there's still more for me to learn, but I think that I definitely received most of my formation relatively recently.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I was reading, it's actually a really terrible book, and I don't even remember the title of it, but it was about somebody it was written in the 90s about the state of religious education then. But there was an incisive statement that just made me both laugh and cry at the same time. Because this guy was talking about how adult reverts often come back and they say, oh my gosh, like, why didn't you tell us about the Eucharist? Why didn't you tell us about this? Why didn't you tell us about that? And the author, who would, like, you know, there was a priest who had worked in Catholic schools for like 25 years, said, we did tell you, you yawned.
Right. Exactly.
You know, it's like you probably did receive all of this, but it didn't matter when you were 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. It's just only once the light bulb goes off that it's like, oh my gosh, this stuff's out there.
Right.
Yeah, I never went to a Catholic school in my life. I went to CCD from 1st to 8th grade, public school all the way through otherwise, including college, which I went to Marist College, which was a Catholic school at one point, but
Alas,
after the council decided against it, I guess, one reason or another.
let's take a vote. Are we Catholic?
Yeah, well, it was actually, the president at the time was a Marist brother who left the order, was permitted by the Marist to stay on as president, and then subsequently led the college to not become Catholic anymore.
Oh.
Well, there's got to be a lesson in there somewhere, right? But anyway, yeah. So I mean, that was my formation was CCD, and it was. I don't remember much from it. I remember being terrified of the tests I would have to take at the end of the year that I wouldn't pass it. I'm not really sure what the repercussion for not passing would have been, but nonetheless, I was afraid of it. And yeah, I mean, there were some bright spots, particularly towards the end. And I'm a CCD teacher now. I think most of my actual formation came after CCD, through relationships with people and through, you know, UCAT studies and youth group and whatnot.
Yeah, that relational piece is so important. And I think when you have a relationship with your CCD teacher and you just see a bigger community that's living out the faith, you see it as so much more effective. Absolutely. Yeah. So Paul, like, now that you are a religion teacher in a Catholic school, like, what do you see from the flip side of, like, what works, what doesn't work?
Interesting. Well, Joe, I think it's great that you're a catechist. Thank you. That's amazing. And you probably have learned more about the faith just from having to teach it, right?
I realized how little I knew about certain specifics, because it's one thing to be able to, like, repeat what you heard Bishop Barron say once, right? Or like what you read in a catechism once, but when a kid says, well, okay, but like, how come X, right? Like, why, like one kid, like, push back one time on, like, why would it not be dumb for God to, like, forgive a terrible, like, murderer or something like that? And it's like, oh wow, yeah, why is God's mercy, why is the fact that God's mercy is so available to us good, you know? So yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot through teaching, absolutely, partially because I think you have to make yourself capable of teaching.
Right, yeah, and I think some catechists forget how much a gift it is for them in their own faith.
Absolutely.
To have to deal with the material every day of their life. What a blessing. And I think Bishop Caggiano said it best. He said the purpose of Catholic education is to help kids fall in love with Jesus Christ. And a lot of schools, as their mission, they're a Catholic school, but their main mission isn't evangelization. But some would argue that there's a link between catechesis and evangelization that's pretty difficult to. It's pretty difficult to sever those two things completely.
Well, I think you make a good distinction there between evangelization and catechesis, because evangelization is really for the heart, catechesis is for the head. Evangelization is that trigger that makes you interested in learning more about Jesus. And even, you go to Matthew 28, Jesus makes that distinction himself. He says, go make disciples of all nations, that's evangelization, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You sacramentalize after they're evangelized.
Right.
And then go teaching them to observe all I've commanded you, the catechesis piece. And that's really how it was in the early church, was evangelize, so your heart comes alive, so you acknowledge that you need Christ and you believe in him. Then you get the sacraments, then you get catechized. Now it's kind of like all jumbled together.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned the early church father, because maybe you can help me with this one. In the beginning of the church, in the very beginning, I've always tried to calculate how many followers Jesus had, and in
12.
Everybody else kind of ran away, and I mean even 11 of them ran away at the crucifixion. But in the early church, say before the Ascension, we have St. Paul referencing one crowd of 500 coming to see Jesus, and it seems as though they were probably convinced about who he was. And then, 3,000 being baptized in Acts. So in the very early church, I think it's safe to speculate that there were at least a couple thousand Christians.
Sure.
Maybe as many as, say, 10,000. And then over the next 300 years, there's this great persecution. And that's a long persecution until the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. How many Christians were left? If you're starting with less than 10,000, say, roughly, and now tens of thousands are killed over the next few hundred years, long persecution, how many are left?
Well,
and scholars think it's in the millions, 3 million Christians. How do you go from less than 10,000 to 3 million over a 300-year-long, almost, persecution where the punishment is death?
Well, as Tertullian said, the blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians.
And I think the short answer is one by one. The souls were won, one by one, through accompaniment, through people inviting them to meet Christ.
They were. And then, 10 years after the Edict of Milan, it went from 10% of the Roman Empire to about 90% of the Roman Empire. Was that a major conversion of heart, or was it politically expedient to become a Catholic at that point? And that's where, for the first time, you get Catholics who are Catholics for reasons other than belief.
Right. And then
which is what we see in
priests started having like roles of prominence.
Yeah, but I mean, now that's the same thing as we see now. Oh, I'm Catholic because my grandfather was Catholic. Not because I believe any of it, but just, I'll never forget. I did not have this experience personally, but I know a priest who I know very well went to Italy, and he was having this conversation with this guy, and I'll say it in Italian, and it makes sense, but so he asked this guy, are you Catholic? Sì, certo, certainly, of course I'm Catholic. And he said, well, do you go to Mass? Oh, padre. So I'm going to screw this up. Sono cattolico, non sono fanatico.
Right.
I'm a Catholic. I'm not a fanatic, right? So of course if you're Italian, of course you're Catholic, right? Whether you believe any of it or not. So that's the question.
I think cultural Catholicism is better than nothing because it at least gets your family into Mass now and again, and then maybe somebody in your family will become devout, or at least there's that link where if you're opened up, and you already believe in Jesus, and you maybe have had your first sacraments, you're more likely to baptize your child and maybe put them into some catechetical program, and maybe Christ will reach them. Christ has more opportunities maybe to reach them. And I know a lot of culturally Catholic families where one kid just became very holy and very close to Christ, but may not have had that link without. But obviously, Christ can reach them through any other way.
That's true. I'm looking over at Joe right now, who is
your finger willy-nilly over there.
who is that example? But Carmelena made a face, and I'm curious what that face was all about.
Oh no, it was a face of agreement. Like I
was
see
it?
that in my yeah,
Like
it was.
It looked like disgust to me.
No,
but I
no,
wasn't
no,
sure.
no. Sorry, no. It was of agreement. I definitely think that that even though I wasn't interested in the faith at a young age, and I didn't pay attention when it was being taught to me, and I just didn't care and had different priorities, that it wasn't so unfamiliar to revert back into the church. It wasn't such a shock to the system as it might have been because I was in the Protestant church, and so when I came into the Catholic church, I was familiar with it and so I think that's why it was harder for my Protestant friends to understand how could I be Catholic. But it had been at least a small piece of my life in sort of a cultural, traditional way that it's like, yeah, of course, why not? Now I understand. Now I understand why I was there. And I think the graces of those sacraments that I did receive, even though I probably shouldn't have, and I didn't even know what I was doing, I think those graces probably came through when I did finally, it was a head and heart thing versus just like, oh, I have to do this because my parents said I should go to Mass, which means much more than just doing it because you feel like you should.
That's interesting. I have a very different opinion, but Joe looks like he wants to.
I want to say something that's going to blur the lines between rant and point, because I get where you're coming from, Paul, and I think you're right to an extent, which is that for a lot of the kids that I teach, the last chance the church has with them is and when they're in 8th grade or soon 6th grade when they're confirmed, and then maybe they'll get married in the church one day. And so I think that we should take that as an opportunity to evangelize. But I think the reason we're using the word evangelize to describe Catholic people in Catholic institutions comes from this, which is that, yeah, we have these culturally Catholic people who get married in the Catholic Church because their grandma won't go to the wedding otherwise, and then baptize their kids because it's not no skin off their back, and then send them CCD because their parents want their grandkids to be Catholic, and you end up where we're trying to evangelize people who are Catholic. That's not what evangelism is supposed to be. It's supposed to be to bring people into the church, and we end up at this point where religious institutions are operating as if they have evangelized people to catechize, and they don't. They have non-evangelized people who they're trying to teach Aquinas to. It makes no sense. You end up in this weird situation where you have kids who are nominally Catholic who don't know that Jesus loves them, that he is God consubstantial with the Father, that he's in the Eucharist, and very, very basic things, and they can't ask their parents questions because they're uncatechized. And so it's like, yeah, to an extent, am I happy that people are there? Absolutely. But I wish that they could ask their parents questions because I see them for 24 hours a year. And I'm not going to make any difference in their lives if they go home then. And it's like, Mom, Dad, my CCD teacher told me that it's actually mortal sin to skip Mass on Sunday. Yeah. But, that's whatever. They have to tell you that. That's what the book says, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. What good am I doing then? Right? So it's like, why did the church grow so much under persecution? Because it mattered. One thing the early church wasn't afflicted with is ambivalence. You couldn't be ambivalent about Christ if you're going to be killed for following him. That's the biggest thing afflicting the kids I teach. And I'm sure it's afflicting the kids you teach too. Ambivalence. They don't care because why would it matter to them whether Christ exists or not? It makes no difference in their lives unless they choose for it to. End of rant.
Glad you wrap up your rant with an end of rant.
Important to be clear about what part of the podcast we're in.
Helpful to know. But actually that goes to something that Paul was saying earlier before we recorded this episode about how one of the factors in your own choosing Christ was the reality of the afterlife. Share a little bit about about what you used to think when you were a kid.
Oh yeah, well the 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell, and how we're supposed to think about these things daily. And it really gives you a different perspective on how you're going to live each day when you're constantly thinking about eternity.
Yeah, and you said you used to think about that even as a kid.
I was just given a gift of having some good spiritual reading materials and having good people around me as a kid to at least move my mind in the right direction, and all of these great saints that write some of the greatest spiritual works ever. They all have a very similar first chapter or introduction where they were saints in different countries in different centuries that spoke different languages and probably didn't have access to each other's writings, and they all start their books with, this first foundation and principle that I am nothing without God, and this life is short. And they're simply there to just remind you of that.
Life is short, yeah. It's funny, I guess I received a similar grace. I can remember being about 9 years old, sitting on the rock out in front of my house, thinking, man, life is going by so fast. And now that I look back, I'm like, dude, I was 9 years old. What's wrong with me? But it was a grace, I guess, to think like this life matters because it's short and there's going to be an eternity. And
Right. And so we have a pretty limited time as individuals to figure out, how can I get this gift that I received of just knowing the meaning of life, knowing who Jesus is, knowing about heaven and hell, and the very simple formula of how to get there. How can I get this into as many other people's minds as possible before I die, so that we can all be in heaven together? And it's the answer is really different for everyone, and that's the difficulty is figuring out in which way is God calling me to bring souls to Him. And there's this great, I don't know where it comes from, but this little story of, when you get to the pearly gates and Peter's there, and we, not literally, but and Peter's there, he looks behind you and says, well, where are the others that you brought with you? And Father, you're a great example, literally in the flesh, of somebody doing that every day, so thank you.
Well, when I was ordained, the priest who vested me, they always kind of give you a great embrace after they put the clothing on you, and he said to me, bring 1,000 souls to heaven with you. And I thought that's a really good insight, and we should all strive to do that. But one of the things when you were talking, I'm thinking is, have you ever heard of the distinction between ethos, pathos, and logos?
Yes.
So in public speaking, there's kind of three elements that need to be gotten across for a public speaker to be effective. The ethos is the public speaker living what they're saying? You don't want a chain-smoking doctor giving you medical advice. It probably would not follow that, Logos, is he competent in what he's saying? Okay, you may be somebody who's very holy, but do you know the faith? Are you talking about the faith? And ultimately, it's pathos, right? How is this going to impact my life? And that's the question a lot of kids perhaps are asking is, all this stuff I keep learning about Jesus. Well, who cares?
Why do I care?
Why do I care?
Why should I care? And I ask my students that all the time. Why should I care about any of this? And I let them answer. And they're so much smarter than you think in the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so how would, I don't know, how do you get that across to young people or to people who are questioning, why should I care about all of this Catholicism business?
One thing that occurred to me late, because I remember I really went through a conversion when I was in 8th grade. And I remember thinking for a few years after that, I don't get why everybody doesn't just do this, because it's fun. There's Frisbees involved and pizza, and it's not that hard to be a good Catholic, it seems. So why doesn't everybody just do what I'm doing? It seems so easy and fun. I didn't realize how dumb that was for many years, because I kind of just missed all of the carry your cross and all those things. And I'm as we're wrapping up the year with my confirmation, it gets said to them, we had lessons on the Beatitudes and on the Corporal Works of Mercy, and I was like, guys, this isn't going to be easy, right? And the way the church is calling you to live is very different from the way you're used to living, because your life's not actually just about you. And I think that to some extent, I think a lot of young people want to care about things, want a cause to fight for. A lot of the kids, even my 8th grade and 7th grade classes, know about politics, are very worked up about things. And then we tell them, well, Jesus loves you, so go make a poster about it. We'll see you when your kids get baptized. And it's no, you actually have a radical call to change the world and to do all sorts of crazy good things for Christ. And that call to action, I think, is something that's really lost in a lot of people. It's lost on me for years,
Just glue cotton balls on pieces of paper.
Yeah, it turns out that's not enough.
Really?
Really? I'll put it this way. I'm sure somebody told me that Christ was present in the Eucharist before 8th grade, but all the posters I must have made didn't seem to get the point through my head until I was about that age. So, how many years were wasted because I was too busy gluing popsicle sticks together?
But go ahead, Carmelena.
No, I was just going to say, sometimes I think, life has a certain way of happening to where you have to get to a point where you question, why does this matter to me? And that's what happened to me. And you have a choice whether or not you continue living the way that you're living, or you can choose Christ and live very differently. And I think that's the point where people who are faithful need to actually live out the faith and kind of identify maybe people who are on the edge, because I think living out the faith is the most important thing, because when that person does hit that point to where they need to potentially turn to Christ, they need to know who to go to.
And living it out counterculturally, because I often hear that quote that's attributed falsely to St. Francis, preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words. And people misuse that quote to say, well, I don't need to talk about Jesus as long as I'm a nice person. Right. Nice people are not going to convert the world. People who are radical and countercultural will. St. Francis was very radical and countercultural, so it's when you do things that the rest of the world, it's when you're open to life and you have a bunch of kids. It's when you're, you're willing to turn your back on your friends because they're all drinking and smoking weed.
It's when you're in middle school and all your friends are gossiping and you're the one who says, guys, this isn't right. Stop gossiping about him or her.
Yeah.
It's radically different for somebody that age, but it's so important.
Yeah, it's when you say to your soccer coach, no, I'm not going to go to practice on Sunday morning because I'm going to like that's the countercultural witness when it costs something that St. Francis, if he ever said that, would be talking about. Not just being nice and getting along.
And I don't know, sometimes I like to believe that when we live out our faith, even if someone is outwardly against it, that we all have, since we were made by God, we do have an inclination to be drawn to goodness. And that goodness would come through. And, you hope that when people see, like, I think people say when they see the Sisters of Life, it's like there's just something about them, right? There's something about them that draws people in, that draws people close, that transforms, and it's God in them. So even if we're not outwardly saying anything or preaching to people, it's the life that we live, Jesus will come through in that. And I think that brings souls to us, especially when life gets hard, because they sense, when things become chaotic, they sense a stability, a peace, a calm, and naturally someone, suffering with whatever, may be drawn to that.
But you make a good point that there has to be kind of that thirst.
Yes.
You can't, everyone, CCD teachers and priests and everybody, religion teachers you're offering the living water, but if there's no thirst there because life's going really well and you're really happy living your life without God, why do you need God, right?
Exactly.
It's only when you have that crisis moment or that inner yearning, like there's got to be more out there, that's when you start seeking.
Is the thirst only a grace, though?
I mean, everything's grace. But
that's something I think about, though, right? Because faith is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
So then, okay, so those kids who totally don't care at all what I'm saying in class, is that because they haven't been given this gift? And if not, why not? You know what I mean? It can be very challenging from a teacher. I'm sure you experience this all the time. Like there's one kid in one of my Sunday night class who, he was just so disruptive. And he started just asking to go to the bathroom and he would disappear for like 20 minutes. The kids would be like, you notice Connor's not back yet? And I was like, guys, don't pay attention here, don't pay attention there. What's the difference? Let him stay in the bathroom, do TikTok for half an hour. Like, it's not gonna listen to me. Let him not listen to me over there. But but then I would think about it afterwards, like, well, why isn't he interested? There's something that's not clicking. Is it me, or is it that he hasn't been given this grace yet? And if not, why not? It's a very difficult thing for me to grapple with, because it makes me sad to think that some of these kids are just gonna fall off the face of the earth because they may not have been given a gift of grace, or a gift of faith, excuse me, or the thirst that you're talking about. Yeah.
I think it's two things, though. I think faith is a gift and a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if sometimes we struggle with, Jesus, I'm having doubts, you have to choose to believe sometimes.
And our Catholic faith teaches us that every human being receives enough grace to be saved at some point in their life. So we can't blame it on, God didn't give me the gift of faith, so that's why I'm condemned. No, I mean, unfortunately, we've ran out of time, but we're going to continue this on a future episode. So stay tuned, because Paul looks like he wants to say something. Tune in next time. For right now, first of all, pray for the grace of faith, not only for yourself, but for the people in your family, for your kids, your grandkids, for your siblings, for anyone else who may have left the church or is just simply seemingly not interested, that their thirst may be, just increased so that they desire the living water. And as much as we can, let us live our lives in such a manner, so radically given over to Christ, that others are attracted to Christ through our example and through our love. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, which is 1350 AM, and also on FM dial. I think it's 103.7. And you can also find us wherever you get your podcasts. So tune in next time.